All right, I think I'm going to go next. Although I realized earlier this morning when we were sort of framing this event and sort of giving some of the background of it, I didn't mention the name or the description of the organization whose office you are in currently. So I just thought I'd mention that real quick. This is the office of the Open Planning Project, which is a New York City-based, obviously, nonprofit that focuses on civic technology and advocacy media as well. We are also all open source. Our website is openplans.org, and the particular division that I am part of is called Top Labs, sort of our R&D incubator for a lot of civic tech. We have our own website for that, which is toplabs.org. And so I'm going to talk about one of our particular projects, which is to create an open standard for 311 services. And this project, Open 311, was inspired by a couple different things. The first was John Geraci, who's the co-founder of Outside In, and put together a group that's very... Actually, I didn't really want this to be on. John, so he did Outside In. He also put together a Meetup group that's actually very synergistic with the OpenGov NYC group, a group called DIY City, which has sort of online organizing and meetups in different cities throughout the country. One of his first ideas was to basically be able to create this open platform for 311 services where you have much more of a crowdsourced and public sort of infrastructure and more transparent, more participatory infrastructure for 311. And you might be wondering, well, isn't 311 already very open, public, and transparent? Well, it turns out that most cases, 311, like if you're asking a question or if you're reporting a problem, you might get continued sort of feedback about that one issue, but no one else will. So if that information was made available public of say like certain questions that people are answering, or certain questions people have and the answers to that, then there could be maybe a. I'm just kind of winging it, so I don't know if I can. Do you know how to turn off the timing? Do I have to do that for each slide? So, I mean, one thing I was thinking when Pablo was talking about this IBM platform for being able to learn the answers to questions is if 311 systems made the kind of questions and answers that that the public facilitates, if they made that information available to anyone, then you could use Google, you could use maybe this system that IBM's creating to help maybe answer your question more easily, and the city might actually be able to help improve on those questions and answers by just having it more open aggregated platform for that. So the idea is that, let's see, are you just able to go back and forth? Well, you can just flip through. I actually also have a PDF I could use. Sorry about this. So 311, if you're not familiar with it, it's supported in most cities in the United States, and there are similar things in cities throughout the world. And it serves two primary functions. One is reporting problems in a city, and two is being able to ask the question just about any kind of city. It's definitely specifically focused on non-emergency issues. If you have an emergency, you would call 911. There are a set of other reserved phone numbers in the system, like 511, which is used for transportation information, and 411, which is directory information. However, these the different services that are supported by 311 are implemented to varying degrees in different cities. Some cities might have a capability of letting you report problems, but not asking general questions, or vice versa. So you want to go to the next one. And so here's an overview of some of the online sort of implementations of 311 services. The first implementation that sort of broke free of this this kind of black box model where a request would go in and no one else would be able to see it. The first time that was broken was with this project called FixMyStreet, which is FixMyStreet, which is in the UK. It's built by an organization called My Society. And they did that, I think it was about 5 years ago. And then that inspired a number of other projects. C-Click-Fix, which Noel mentioned earlier, is something very similar, where it's this open platform that that allows anyone to report an issue in a city, even if the city doesn't actually have a 3-in-1 service. And then likewise, in the Netherlands, there's a project called Verbeterdebert, which, again, it does the same thing. And then the first city to actually implement this model was Washington, D.C., which in the summertime, they created a read-write API for their internal, the existing 3-in-1 system, so that websites like these other ones could be built up around their 3-in infrastructure, and anyone could build those websites because it was an open API, and likewise anyone could build like a mobile app. So over the summer they opened that up, I think on the next slide. So sorry I'm not following this presentation before. So the idea of when you create this open API is not only can you sort of open up the possibility of applications that people can build for it, but you can combine that application logic and that data with any other kind of application. And one of the examples I think Noel mentioned earlier was, well, what if you could see what intersections were really unsafe, or if you're a cyclist or a pedestrian and there's just a really dangerous intersection. There's one that I experienced frequently just on the Brooklyn side, just under the Manhattan Bridge. And there were historical precedents for people almost, or people getting killed there or people getting badly injured just because there are so many lanes of traffic coming in. So if you could better map those areas and you pull that data out of something like 3-in-1 or 911 or existing sort of data the city might have, what if you could combine that with this like app Ride the City, which helps you map routes on your bike based on where bike lanes are? What if you could also take into account unsafe intersections or where there's nasty potholes or construction or other information that's going through a 3-in-1 system? So that's part of the idea of what you can do with open data and open API like I'm advocating. Sorry. Yeah. Keep going. So one example of a city that opened up 3-in-1 was, like I mentioned, DC, and they did a study of how much how much interest was in that data, and it turned out that of all the data that they were providing, 3-in-1 was the second most used data set. The number one was crime. So that's good information for other cities in terms of what they're prioritizing as far as open data. You want to go to the next one? So again, this is just covering what an open API is. Allows you to build in, GPS. If your phone supports GPS, you can tie that into the 3-in-1 system just automatically. And the idea is that when you provide an open API like DC did, you kind of get this distributed network of innovation where you have the private sector, the public sector, you have the government and citizens all sort of like collaborating on the same platform. And we've done one example. Well, we've actually done 2 examples of this kind of technology here at the Open Planning Project. One is sort of Civic issue tracking built on top of existing platform for issue tracking, which is issue tracking for software bugs, actually, the track bug tracker. So we basically just built on geospatial extensions for that. So the same model of reporting problems and tracking issues could be applied to real-world things. And so, what does that idea introduce where you treat a city the same way you treat open source software, where you're able to help bring in from the community bug fixes and feature requests. Go to the next one. And so, it introduces new possibilities of new workflows, and also not just fixing problems, but also being able to introduce new solutions. So again, another example that we do at the Open Planning Project built around open sort of issue tracking is working with on this pilot project with the New York City Department of Transportation on where in a neighborhood or where on any given city block is the city is the neighborhood underserved in terms of bike racks. Oftentimes you'll go someplace and you'll see bike racks chained up to, or bikes chained up to fences or light posts, and technically it's actually against city law to lock your bike to anything other than a bike rack. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have enough resources to go and respond to every individual request or do thorough studies of neighborhoods. So we built a platform, on this model of open issue tracking that allows people to collect, I think the DOT requires at least 100 well-documented, verified locations before they can do a bulk order. So it makes it efficient. So you get this kind of collaborative process between the city and citizens. And another thing you can do with an open system is you can integrate existing open standards. So one example of that is a real-time protocol for publishing and subscribing to data, which is called PubSubHub, and an existing standard for syndicating geospatial content, which is GeoRSS. And so we did a really simple case study where we combine those two technologies so you get real-time geospatial data. That's like just an example of something that could be built into this system. Another thing that is really important to consider is accessibility. Not everyone has a smartphone. Not everyone has internet access. However, there are a lot of new technologies that are coming out that allow web APIs and more complex technology to be integrated into normal phone calls. So I don't know if you're familiar with things like Google Voice and some of these new services that actually automatically transcribe phone calls and allow web developers to seamlessly integrate web APIs with phone calls. But that is a really important thing to consider, especially if you have something like IBM's system that can help answer questions. If you can automatically transcribe phone calls, you have this text database of questions and answers that are coming through 3-on-1. And so the idea is that a web platform or an open platform for government, you think of it just like any other infrastructure in a city, like streets, and this idea of architecture of participation, which is like the Web 2.0 sort of model. Really, that's just another way of describing democracy. Let's skip this slide. And so I think 3-on-1 is really an opportunity to engage with very tangible, on-the-ground, super hyper-local democracy and civic participation. 911 is sort of analogous to like voting or impeaching someone, right? It's like this one crucial thing where it's an emergency. You just have to like deal with it. Whereas 3-on-1 is lots of little things that sort of like build up to collective action that can accomplish significant things every day. And how opportunities like this can really give us a way of reimagining how our cities are being used and really realize like how participatory our civic infrastructure can be. One example that is been well demonstrated in New York City is this Summer Streets program, which closes down major streets in the city to cars and just opens it up to pedestrians. So, what if we could, use technology to sort of like contribute to these new kinds of ways of using our city, whether that's voting or saying what the problem is or what the new opportunities are. So that's me rambling about Open 3-on-1. This presentation was created for a talk that I gave in September, and I was trying not to follow it, but ended up rambling. There are a couple significant updates. The main thing that's really changed is a lot of the precedent for this was built by Washington, D.C., but they sort of have limited resources to spread the idea and the concept of an open API to other cities. However, San Francisco has picked this up. Mayor Gavin Newsom in San Francisco made a big announcement about the city adopting an Open 3-on-1 API, I think in October. And since then, they've started working with me and with Boston and talking to New York a little bit about, and as well as the developers behind SeeClickFix about coalescing this standard, which is a lot of what I've been talking about is sort of like the possibility and the idea, but really this is only possible if you can all agree on one standard. So there has, in the past couple months, there has been a lot of work around actually codifying the standard and the system architecture. And so right now a lot of that is being led by San Francisco. And they're pretty progressive and moving on a pretty tight timeline. So aside from all these little proof of concepts and pilot studies, or aside from Washington, D.C., as soon as San Francisco comes online and is able to interoperate with DC and say Boston, we'll actually have a demonstrable way of showing how open source software can be used in this open platform in multiple cities, and you can kind of have this interoperable ecosystem. So keep an eye out for that. Open3-on-1.org, we have a mailing list. We're going to try and start doing like monthly meetings on updates on how cities are working with this kind of technology. Any questions?
So when somebody calls here, their question is not recorded. The question and the answer are not recorded, or they're recorded.
I mean, I actually don't know the question was about whether or not in New York questions and answers that came through 3-in-1 were recorded. I don't know the details about whether they're recorded. Andrew Nicklin might.
We do record the questions definitely, and I think we record whether or not they were successfully answered. But I'm not sure that most of the things in our system are already answers to begin with. So it's a matter of working through the system based upon questions to find that answer. So there may not be a strong correlation between them, but we definitely are tracking sort of our success rate on phone calls.
But you don't provide the recording of the questions available to the API?
Yeah, the questions that you have stored internally, that knowledge base is not public.
No, not only the knowledge base, but the questions people ask, because there are some privacy concerns, and if I call asking for...
No, we do aggregate metrics on it, but we don't. So there's no... I don't think we're putting out any information about private citizen information. The other thing is you can call and ask a question and not identify yourself at all, and we'll still give you an answer. So, and that's tracked as a,
Yeah, but if you don't put available a transcription, you put the actual sound wave, then you'll get your voice.
Right. We're not recording those as far as I know. I could be wrong, but I don't believe we're recording those.
So I guess to summarize, the answer was the city does record metrics on whether or not questions are answered. They do already have set of answers already stored in their knowledge base, but you don't know whether or not there's any internal recording of questions? Okay. And even if there was any recording of questions, there isn't a way of easily accessing the data of questions and answers. Any other questions? Yep.
You guys plan to scale internationally?
So there are a couple platforms that I went through already that do similar things, but haven't actually established, well, either aren't open source or haven't established interoperable protocol. So like C-Click Fix, which is very, is very well used in the United States. They actually have started to scale internationally. The first example of this, FixMyStreet in the UK, their source is actually open. Canada has copied that. Actually, I think they've completely rewritten it in Python using the Django framework, fixmystreet.ca. It's actually something we might be working on the hackathon tomorrow, the codathon tomorrow. And so we have 2 open source implementations of this technology. But the idea is that we're not going to attempt to scale any one particular software code base internationally. We'll make it available if different cities and different municipalities want to use whichever one makes the most sense to them. That's great. I'm more focused on the standard, so the actual the data format, the schema, and the API. So we want to make sure that whatever software you're using, because a lot of especially big cities already have massive software stacks that handle this. We just want to make sure that they're interoperable, so that if one person builds like a mobile application, it can be used in any other city, and they won't have to reinstall it or have a different app for every city, which is currently the case. So yeah, internationally we are. I mean, I am definitely working internationally, working closely with Canada, and been in touch with in the UK and in the Netherlands. So yes, international standard. Any other questions? I think we're yeah. Sorry, that was like 3 times longer than it should have been.
20 minutes long.